So that why a home inspection? Pretty obvious, but but I still think it's worth reminding everybody, right, that it benefits all four parties. The buyer obviously hopefully gets good education about the house. He gets a realistic expectation of, when they're going to need to replace that roof, when they're going to need to get that air conditioning system serviced. Lots of questions that should be answered. The seller, obviously, same thing. A good home inspection should benefit them as well, because I'm sure you've seen it. I certainly see it all the time, right? We discover things that the seller didn't know about. They might have lived there for 20 years, and they didn't realize that they had termites coming up underneath the front door. So, reality, but still good, right? The thorough home inspection is going to, I would argue, also benefit the seller because, again, it helps kind of expand that disclosure to the buyer. And then obviously buyer's agent, seller's agent, again, I would argue to keep all of us out of hot water, a good competent inspection, right? Because that way, again, buyer doesn't say 6 months in, well, how come you didn't tell me the roof was going to leak in the winter? A good inspector is going to say, okay, well, yes, this house is vulnerable to ice dams, and here's what you should do, improve the insulation, improve the ventilation to help, minimize those problems. To take it kind of a step further, a competent inspection, right? Because I'm sure all of you have seen it, and I've certainly seen it. There's lots of levels of sailboats out there, and there's lots of levels of home inspectors, despite licensing. Realtors, no different, right? You're all licensed professionals, but obviously, depending on how much experience you have in the business and whether this is full-time career for you or whether you sell one house a year, obviously that's going to make a difference in your expertise doing it. So I talk about this concept of kind of getting closer to full disclosure, and I say get closer because reality for us too, right? I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't give you a definitive statement about the heat exchanger of the furnace, right? That's a job for a furnace technician, and that's why in our report, pretty standard, it's going to say, you want the heat exchanger examined, you hire that independent technician to check it out. Again, that's very standard in the industry. It's built right into the home inspection regulations in New Hampshire. But again, you think about the buyer who's going through this process for the first time, they probably don't understand all those things, and that's why it's important, obviously, for them to be there and to slow them down and to say, okay, buyer, this is a 30-year-old furnace, and it's mediocre quality. It'd be a good idea to have this heat exchanger checked because that's kind of normal life expectancy of a furnace. So closer to full disclosure. Increase this consumer satisfaction with you. Again, to me, whether you're working certainly on the buyer's side, right, recommending a good, competent home inspector is key because they're not going to be happy if the home inspector, blows through there in half an hour and says, great house, and in reality, there's a few issues. And same thing again if you're on the seller side. I think a good, competent inspection should help with that. And I know I say that with a little pause because I understand the challenge. I sold my house this year. I understand the challenge associated with, with representing the seller, being a seller. It's not easy again, but I know that, it's part of reality of the process, and again, it's certainly something that you can make a difference on, coaching your buyers properly, coaching your sellers properly.